Hey guys, tonight we travel across centuries of silence, through foggy mountains, quiet temples, and finally into the fluorescent hum of a neuroscience lab. You're about to follow a line of thought that has slipped quietly across cultures, whispered from lips to parchment, from incense to MRI scanners. The topic: meditation. Not the one your wellness app chirps about, but the slow old kind, the boring kind, the one that's shaped centuries of stillness. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit at the mouth of a cave in the Himalayas a few thousand years back. Wind slips in and out, like it's meditating too. The world is stone, cold, still. Behind you, deeper inside the cave, someone sits, not speaking, not moving. And they've been doing this for days, maybe weeks, possibly longer. They aren't trying to go viral. They're just trying to go inward. Meditation, or dhyana as they called it, wasn't a product, it was a practice. No chance yet, no schools, no brand. Just humans trying to make peace with their own thoughts. Historians still argue whether these early practices came out of Vedic fire rituals, or if they emerged independently among hermit communities. Either way, around the 6th century BCE, meditation became a formalized escape from chaos, a kind of philosophical sigh. And then it wandered. One fringe theory suggests Indian monks crossed paths with early Taoist seekers, maybe in mountain passes, maybe over tea. Either way, by the time meditation reached China, it had to change its name to fit a new accent. Dhyana became Chan. Same breath, different syllable. But that's for later. Tonight, you just sit. The cave is boring. Gloriously so. Your eyelids grow heavier. There are no revelations, just rocks. And still, the silence speaks. You blink, and a few hundred years pass. The cave is now a temple courtyard, somewhere in eastern China. Mist clings to the tiled roofs like old thoughts that refuse to leave. A monk in gray robes sweeps the stone path, not quickly, not slowly. Just presently. This is the age of Chan Buddhism. The Indian concept of dhyana has drifted east and taken root here. The robes have changed. The tea is different. And now there's bamboo instead of banyan trees. But the breath is the same. A scholar from the Tang dynasty once wrote that true understanding of the mind is like catching a feather with a breath of wind. You read that on a scroll that's older than most modern countries. A bit dramatic, but still poetic. Now, historians still debate whether these early monks actually practiced what we now call meditation, or if they were simply sitting in silence because there wasn't much else to do between chores and calligraphy. But if you look closely, see that monk in the corner. He's not praying. He's not sleeping. He's watching his thoughts pass like paper boats on a slow stream. And you, for a moment, are watching him watch his thoughts. A gentle breeze slips through the trees. You wonder what he's thinking. He wonders why you're wondering. You both return to stillness. Modern scholars call this interoceptive awareness, and the ancient Chinese just called it sitting. And then, as dynasties rose and fell like breaths, this sitting drifted again, this time across the sea. Zen had entered Japan, but that's not your stop yet. You linger, back in the courtyard, where someone, somewhere, just struck a singing bowl, and it's still ringing. You're on a boat now. No, not literally, though that would be nice, wouldn't it? A quiet rowboat on a misty lake. No emails, no family WhatsApp groups sending blurry screenshots. Just you, a paddle, and the steady rhythm of silence. But this boat is metaphorical. It's the one that carried Zen from China to Japan. Across the choppy cultural seas of the 12th century, amid merchant ships and occasional pirates, Zen made landfall. You arrive in Kamakura, back then a political hub, now better known for its oversized Buddha. The samurai, Japan's elite warrior class, take a liking to this new form of Buddhism, probably because it doesn't demand dramatic robes or excessive chanting. It simply asks them to sit down, shut up, and breathe, which, for a class trained in the art of stillness before battle, feels oddly familiar. Historians still argue whether Zen influenced the stoic calm of the samurai, or whether it merely reinforced what was already there. Either way, Zen temples became more than spiritual havens. They were dojos of the mind. And you? You're standing on the polished wooden floor of one right now. A monk in black robes glides past you like a shadow that forgot to attach itself. He rings a bell, and the meditation begins. You sit on a cushion, legs folded, trying not to think about how badly your knee hurts. A thought creeps in. Did I leave the stove on? Another. Should I have gone into accounting instead? Another. How long is this supposed to last? But the monk told you, thoughts are clouds, not commands. You let them drift. You don't fight them. You don't follow them. You just bow to them mentally, like small uninvited guests at a very quiet party. Eventually the bell rings again. You open your eyes, and the world looks softer. You're walking now, slowly, silently, along a path that crunches with gravel beneath your feet. It's a temple garden, still in Japan, still in the echo of Zen. And in front of you, a monk is sweeping nothing, not a leaf in sight, not a twig, not even a rogue pebble, just an endless patch of already perfect gravel, gently brushed into patterns that mimic waves. The rake moves like a whisper. It's a kind of moving meditation, you're told. An act of care, not for the result, but for the doing itself. You wonder if you've ever swept anything that way, or if you've ever done anything just for the peace of doing it. Zen calls it zanshin, a word that doesn't quite translate, but which lingers somewhere between presence, awareness, and the way your mind stays behind after your body has left, like the smell of tea leaves in an empty cup. Historians still debate how much of this quiet culture seeped into everyday Japanese life or remained cloistered in monasteries. But one thing is clear. The world of Zen gave rise to something beyond religion, something woven into architecture, garden design, even martial arts. Especially martial arts. You watch a young student practicing archery. She draws the bow not to hit the target, but to feel the breath between movements. The shot isn't the goal, it's the residue of attention. And you're struck by the sheer radical idea that action could be divorced from ambition. This is what the West often missed when it imported meditation in cargo containers marked self-help. In this place, silence isn't a tool, it's a home. One that doesn't care whether you're improving, manifesting, or optimizing. It just wants you to sit, breathe, sweep the path that's already clean. And maybe, if you're lucky, forget that you were ever in a hurry. Now you're in China, but not the booming cities, not the bullet trains or smoggy skylines. You're in the past, somewhere misty and mountainous. The kind of place where time is shaped more by the river than by the clock. And at the edge of that river, someone is sitting very still. They are not a monk. Not officially. Just an old scholar in worn robes, a little tea kettle beside them, watching the water flow. Their name might be Zhuangzi, or maybe someone less famous, equally wise. Their eyes are open, but not quite looking, and in their lap is a scroll. It's not about taxes. It's not about empire. It's about the useless tree. A tree so gnarled and twisted no carpenter would ever want it. And that, the scroll says, is its salvation. because it's useless, it gets to live. You're starting to see a theme here, aren't you? This is Taoism, the ancient Chinese philosophy that says, stop striving, stop fixing, stop being so obsessed with becoming a better you. There is no better you. There's only the river, and whether you float in it with grace or flail against it with spreadsheets. The Taoist approach to meditation wasn't always structured. It didn't involve perfectly aligned chakras or 10-minute timers. It was more like drifting, breathing, forgetting to be important. You picture one of those scholars standing barefoot in a bamboo grove talking to a bird. Not for enlightenment, just because it's a Tuesday. And here's the twist historians still argue about. Was this casual spiritual practice subversive or just quietly powerful? Did these meditations shape politics, poetry, medicine? Or did they just keep a few gentle souls sane in dynastic chaos? Either way, it's soft. And it's working. Even now, as you lie there in bed, the river's starting to seep in. Let it. From the misty bamboo groves of China, you now drift westward, not by map, but by mood. You find yourself in a windswept cave in the Judean desert, the air heavy with salt from the nearby Dead Sea. The sun bakes the rocks by day, but now it's dusk. Cool, quiet, cavernous. Inside the cave, a man kneels, scribbling furiously onto parchment. He's not writing to be published. He's not writing to impress Rome. He's writing to stay whole. This is the world of early mystics. Jewish ascetics, Christian hermits, later Sufi dervishes, people who went into the wilderness not to escape the world, but to hear it more clearly. They didn't use the word meditation, not in the modern sense, but their practices, chanting psalms, reciting scripture, sitting in pure silence, were indistinguishable from what we now call mindfulness. Imagine fasting alone for 40 days, not because it makes for good Instagram content, but because you believe the desert itself has something to teach you. About hunger, about the limits of ego, about surrender. And surrender was key. You weren't trying to bend your life into a shape. You were trying to unbend, to melt, to become so still that maybe, just maybe, God would whisper something you hadn't yet ruined with language. One fringe fact you might like, the ancient Essenes, that's the sect behind the Dead Sea Scrolls, may have used sunrise gazing as a form of daily meditation, literally turning their faces to the dawn and letting their eyes burn with silence. Historians still argue whether these practices were ever meant for the masses or were strictly tools for the spiritually elite. But the effect is universal. When the world is too loud, some people go into the hills, and in those hills, they remember how to breathe. You're not in a desert. You're in a bedroom, but still breathe. Now the breeze shifts, and as it does, you're carried once again. Not forward this time, but upward, through time and terrain, to the icy, pine-shaded monasteries of Tibet, high above the clouds, where the air grows thin and the silence becomes a presence of its own. The Tibetan Buddhist monks perfected what can only be described as patience sculpted into ritual. No Instagrammable yoga flows, no incense-laced playlists, just the slow rhythm of life conducted entirely on purpose. Picture a man sitting cross-legged for hours in temperatures that would freeze most people's intentions solid. He's not meditating to feel better. He's not trying to clear his head. He's training, not just the mind, but the body, the breath, and whatever lies beneath both. In Tibetan Dzogchen, one of the more esoteric schools of practice, meditators are taught to rest in what they call the natural state, which ironically takes decades to find and even longer to trust. The whole idea that beneath all the drama, fear, and Instagram reels of your thoughts, there's a stillness already there, like sky beneath clouds. Fun, fringe fact. Advanced monks were known to perform something called tummo, inner fire meditation. They could raise their body temperature at will, and reportedly, dry, wet blankets placed on their bare backs in freezing temperatures. You meanwhile complain when the duvet slips off your foot. And yet, historians still argue whether this training was spiritual purification or an ancient biohack. Was it about transcending suffering or surviving Himalayan winters? Either way, the result was the same. Clarity that didn't blink, presence that didn't need an app. These monks didn't seek enlightenment like a destination. They practiced as if they were polishing a mirror, slowly, steadily, so they could finally recognize their own face. Tonight, maybe don't aim for enlightenment. Just let your mirror fog. That's a start. And now you drift westward, just slightly, and forward in time, just enough, to arrive in the sandstone libraries and sunlit courtyards of Nalanda, India, one of the world's first great universities. And no, it didn't offer a bachelor's in mindfulness influencing. Here, between the 5th and 12th centuries, students gathered to study medicine, astronomy, logic, grammar, and yes, meditation. But not the sleepy kind. Not the put on your noise-canceling headphones and breathe for 4 minutes kind. At Nalanda, meditation was dissected like a science and debated like philosophy. Thousands of scholars, many barefoot, most deeply caffeinated by butter tea, argued not whether inner peace existed, but what it meant, what it did, whether it could outlast death, or if it was just another mental weather pattern we mistake for climate. And among those robed scholars, a few early outliers who suggested meditation wasn't about escape, but engagement. That true calm didn't mean tuning out the world, but hearing it more precisely. Fringe tidbit. Some texts from Nalanda describe soundless recitation, a kind of silent chanting where the lips don't move, the breath doesn't change, but internally the mantra echoes. It's basically the 7th century equivalent of having a song stuck in your head, except on purpose, and supposedly enlightening. Of course, historians still debate whether Nalanda's meditation curriculum was more therapeutic than theological. Were they training saints or stress managers? Either way, what you're witnessing here is a shift, from caves and isolation to classrooms and debate halls, from mystics to professors. Still stoic, still calm, but now a little academic, a little skeptical, and maybe, just maybe, a little more human. You too are in a kind of Nalanda now, arguing gently with your own thoughts, debating what matters in the quiet hours. No pressure, just breathe and let the next scroll unfurl. By the time you reach the 12th century, your sleepy timeline threads through China, where something truly strange is happening. Meditation, once a wildflower growing on windswept mountaintops, is now being cultivated in imperial gardens. Tidy, ritualized, highly respectable. Here in the Song dynasty, Chan Buddhism, what the Japanese would later call Zen, is not just tolerated by the court, it's fashionable. Think court poets dropping vague koans over tea, or government officials taking mindful breaths before signing off on tax reforms. That's right, bureaucratic Zen. You find yourself in a lacquered temple nestled among bamboo forests. A monk sweeps the stone path, slowly, carefully, over and over. No podcast, no deadline. Just sweep, pause, breathe. It's a meditation as much as it's maintenance. But here's your quirky tidbit. During this time, monks trained in silent illumination, a practice so minimalist it made earlier meditation styles seem downright chatty. No chanting, no mantra, just sitting, eyes open, nothing to do and everything to feel. Some records even suggest a monk could spend 10 years practicing this, just learning how to sit. Honestly, it's the spiritual equivalent of marinating. And yet, the practice spread like quiet wildfire, especially among scholars who found solace in simplicity after surviving court politics, which, let's face it, was probably more stressful than enlightenment itself. Of course, historians still debate whether Chan's silent meditation was a protest against ritual, or just a very elegant way to nap with your back straight. But in this moment, under the jade shadows and with the scent of pine resin in the air, you sense the stillness these monks sought. Not in escape, but in deep, present awareness. The kind that doesn't flinch or fidget. The kind you can hear if you stop listening. Let yourself lean into that silence, even for just a second. That's enough. You're learning without learning. Now you drift westward, slowly as though carried by the quiet breath of the centuries, and arrive in Persia, where the scent of jasmine mingles with parchment ink, and the stars are mapped not only in the sky but on the inner landscape of the soul. Meditation here is woven into the very fabric of poetry and mysticism, each breath tucked between verses of longing and divine remembrance. This is the world of the Sufis, Islamic mystics who saw the heart not as a muscle but as a mirror, meant to reflect God. Their version of meditation was often musical, often ecstatic, often dangerously beautiful. You might think you've landed in a sleepy history, but here's the twist. Stillness, to them, could be a dance. You picture yourself in a candlelit room somewhere in 13th century Konya. The walls hum with the rhythm of ney flutes, and in the center, a figure in white begins to turn. Slowly, deliberately. One hand up to the sky, the other down to the earth. The whirling dervish. Not a performer, but a meditator in motion. Their spinning becomes prayer. Their dizziness, transcendence. Quirky detail time. Some Sufi texts from this era actually describe specific breathing patterns that mimic the rise and fall of ocean tides. One even compares spiritual breath to camel steps across desert dunes. Slow, deliberate, and likely to spit on you if provoked. Just kidding. Sort of. And while this spiritual style might seem far from a Himalayan cave or a Harvard lab, historians still argue whether Sufism borrowed elements from Buddhist and Vedic traditions, or arrived at its insights purely through its own poetic channels. Either way, it shows us something profound. Silence doesn't have to be silent. Stillness doesn't have to sit. In this moment, your mind is gently whirling with the dervishes, not in frenzy, but in rhythm. You begin to feel the invisible music, the way your breath keeps time with centuries. From Persia, you now float eastward again, across the rustling sands and date palms of Central Asia, until you arrive in the vast scholarly courts of China during the Tang Dynasty. Here, meditation becomes a matter of ink, incense, and inner cultivation. You're entering the land of Confucian scrolls and Taoist silences, where the garden and the body mirror each other in quiet symmetries. Imagine it's early morning, and you're in the courtyard of a scholar official. The bamboo rustles gently as steam rises from a cup of oolong. There's a zither nearby, its strings half-tuned and unplayed. And there's a man, maybe you, seated in silent posture, legs folded, eyes neither closed nor open. This is Zuo Wang, or sitting and forgetting. It's not forgetting like losing your keys. It's deeper. You forget your name, your ambitions, the past and future. You forget you're forgetting. And somehow, that clears the path for something more vast to arrive. The Taoists were fans of paradox after all. Their version of meditation involved emptying the mind so that the universe could pour itself in. And if that sounds like philosophical poetry, well, it was. One 9th century monk wrote, "The moon does not intend to reflect in the pond, nor does the pond intend to hold the moon." That's either deep wisdom or the most poetic way ever to say, don't try so hard. Now, here's a quirky fact. Some Chinese meditation manuals from this time included very specific dietary tips, like avoiding onions or garlic because they stir the lower passions. Historians still argue whether this was a practical health rule or a veiled metaphor for ego. Either way, you're probably rethinking tonight's stir-fry. These practices quietly influenced everything from martial arts to calligraphy. Even the act of brush painting became meditative. Each stroke an exhale, each character a breath. And long before Harvard began scanning meditators' brains, these Chinese thinkers were already mapping the subtle corridors of mind and body through qi, or life energy. So here you sit beside a pond in a garden that's no longer quite separate from you. Bamboo clicks in the breeze, and the world continues, quietly, like a breath you almost didn't notice. The breeze from the bamboo fades as you drift southward now, slipping down past the Vietnamese coast, across the Bay of Bengal, into the warm pulse of the Indian subcontinent once more. But this isn't the land of early Vedas anymore. This is 11th century India, where Buddhist ideas have mingled with Hindu metaphysics, and where meditation now flows through the intricate lattice of Tantra, Bhakti, and stillness. You find yourself in a stone temple in Odisha, half shadowed by the jungle. The walls are carved with dancing figures, gods mid-gesture, a universe caught mid-breath. Somewhere nearby, someone is chanting, not loudly, but rhythmically, like waves against a shore. You feel it before you hear it, the rise and fall, the inhale and exhale. You're not sure if it's mantra, prayer, or something in between, but it steadies your heartbeat. In this era, meditation isn't just seated silence, it's ecstatic devotion, sacred geometry, the slow spiral of breath through invisible channels. Some yogis focus on a single syllable, Om, Hrim, Shreem, until the sound folds in on itself like a lotus. Others picture gods not as separate entities but as dimensions within their own awareness. There's a phrase for this. Darshan, not seeing the divine, but being seen by it. Here's something quirky. Some texts suggest that the right nostril is solar and the left is lunar, and that alternating breath between them can harmonize your inner universe. It sounds mystical, yes, but modern science now calls it Nadi Shodhana, or alternate nostril breathing, and recommends it for calming anxiety. Who knew your nose had a binary code? Scholars still argue whether these practices were originally spiritual blueprints or metaphors for psychological transformation. But the lines blur fast. One moment you're visualizing a blue-skinned deity, and the next you're not sure whether they were a symbol or a mirror. And in this blur, in the mix of breath, chant, posture, devotion, you notice something else. Meditation here is no longer a solo act. It's woven into festivals, temple dances, morning routines. You don't escape the world to meditate. You breathe inside it. So you stay for a while in that temple, warmed by stone, half lit by firelight, where the breath of centuries still echoes against carved walls. You don't chant, but you listen, and that's enough. You leave the temple, but not its stillness. It lingers in you as you drift west, across arid plains, over shifting sands and into the world of Sufi mystics, 12th century Persia and beyond. Here, meditation sheds its formality and becomes poetry. Picture this. A courtyard in Shiraz, moonlight casting shadows on glazed tiles. A man in flowing robes spins slowly, arms outstretched, not dizzy but balanced, anchored in some invisible rhythm. He is a dervish, a practitioner of Sufi whirling, which is not a performance but a form of deep meditation. Every spin is a step away from ego, toward annihilation in love. Fana, they call it. Meanwhile, in another corner of the Islamic world, scholars and seekers debate the nature of the soul, ruh, nafs, qalb, and how best to polish the heart so that it reflects the divine. Meditation here doesn't mean silence alone. It can be zikr, the rhythmic repetition of the names of God, whispered or chanted, sometimes for hours. Some say you must repeat it 99 times. Others say until you forget yourself entirely. And yet others, like Rumi, just write poems. You may have heard the quote, "Be like a tree and let the dead leaves drop." It sounds modern, minimalist even, but it's born from this Sufi lineage, where letting go is the core act of remembrance. Here's a scholarly tangent for you. Historians still debate whether Sufi meditation influenced Christian mysticism or vice versa. After all, the Crusades weren't just blood and fire, they were also cultural collisions. Some believe the practices of Sufi ascetics filtered into Europe through Spain and Sicily, shaping the inner practices of monks and mystics like Meister Eckhart or Teresa of Avila. Even the rhythm of breathing, walking, and repeating phrases. These practices hop borders without passports. They evolve, but don't vanish. Back in that courtyard, the spinning has slowed. The dervish rests his hands on his heart. He is still again, but he's not done. In fact, he's only just arrived. And as you watch him, something inside you, something long coiled, starts to unwind. Not dramatically, but gently, like the last spiral of smoke from a candle. You don't need to spin, you just breathe. That's enough. And now, let's sail from the sands of Persia into the mists of the Far East, China, around the 6th century. Here, meditation becomes more than inward reflection. It becomes an embodiment of harmony with the Tao, the Way. You're in a bamboo grove somewhere near Luoyang. The air is thick with the scent of pine and moss. A small pavilion sits beside a koi pond, where the surface mirrors the sky so perfectly that it's hard to tell which way is up. Inside the pavilion, a scholar sits, not cross-legged, not in any rigid pose. Just sitting, like water in a bowl. This is Zuo Wang, literally sitting and forgetting. A Taoist practice. It's not about concentration or effort. It's about releasing everything, even the desire to meditate. You forget your name, your ambitions, your opinions. Eventually, even the act of forgetting forgets itself. Sound paradoxical. That's the point. Lao Tzu, the semi-mythical author of the Tao Te Ching, would approve. He might tell you that striving too hard to be calm is like trying to smooth water with your hands. The more you try, the more it ripples. Meanwhile, not far away, Buddhist monks from India have brought their own ideas of meditation. The fusion of these two philosophies, Taoism and Buddhism, eventually becomes Chan, which later evolves into Zen in Japan. In a Chan monastery, you might find a monk sweeping leaves, not as a chore, but as a meditation. Attention is not reserved for grand ceremonies. It's in the daily, the mundane, boiling water, serving tea, sweeping the earth. All of it becomes a mirror in which the self is quietly dissolved. And then there's the story of Huineng, the 6th patriarch of Chan. He was illiterate, a kitchen worker, but achieved sudden enlightenment upon hearing the Diamond Sutra. When asked what he attained, he replied, "There was nothing to attain." Scholars still debate what nothing means in this context. Was it nihilism? Was it liberation? Or just a clever dodge? Regardless, the seed was planted, and it grew across seas and centuries. By the time it reached Kyoto, Zen monks were raking gravel gardens in deliberate, sweeping arcs, each stroke a breath, each stone a thought, or the absence of one. And so, once again, the map of meditation unfolds, not as a straight line, but as a circle, or perhaps a spiral. Every culture adds its own echo, its own flavor, its own silence. And somewhere in all this, maybe right now, you've stopped waiting for an answer, because the question itself has gone quiet. Now, let's cross the Pacific, not in a blaze of enlightenment, but in a slow, scholarly drizzle. We arrive in Boston, Massachusetts, sometime in the mid-20th century. There are no mountains here, no chanting monks, no bamboo groves or incense. What you'll find instead is fluorescent lighting, clipboards, and a lot of very curious psychologists. The scene is a Harvard laboratory, not exactly the first place you'd expect global meditation to settle down for a nap, but it is here that Eastern thought will be stripped of its robes, translated, timed, measured, and perhaps misunderstood. You're standing behind a one-way mirror, watching a volunteer sit in silence as wires protrude from their scalp and chest. Electrodes hum gently. The researchers whisper words like alpha wave production, relaxation response, and autonomic regulation. Meditation, once a mystical journey inward, is now being reduced to blood pressure and brain scans. Not out of cynicism, but curiosity. Science is trying to understand what sages once taught with parables and silence. Dr. Herbert Benson, remember that name, publishes a study at Harvard Medical School in the 1970s showing that meditation can slow the heartbeat, lower cortisol levels, and induce what he calls the relaxation response. He's not a guru, just a cardiologist with a hunch. And he was right. And so, Western wellness quietly adopts an ancient habit. But now, it's repackaged in neutral tones. No incense, no Sanskrit, just mindfulness. Which brings us to John Kabat-Zinn, a molecular biologist with a calm voice and a yoga mat. In 1979, he launches the mindfulness-based stress reduction program at UMass Medical School. It's designed for people who are sick, stressed, or just human. He calls it secular, clinical, but underneath the lab coat is a deep bow to the Buddha. Meanwhile, meditation apps begin appearing like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Calm, Headspace, Insight Timer. You no longer need a mountain or a monastery. Just a phone and maybe 10 spare minutes between meetings. And here's the strange thing. For all the neuroscience and behavioral studies, the results echo what the ancients knew. Meditation quiets the mind. It softens suffering. It reminds you that you're not your thoughts, your fears, or your grocery list. Even science, in all its data-driven humility, seems to admit something ancient works. Of course, there are critics. Some scholars warn that decontextualizing meditation from its spiritual roots is like bottling lightning, or selling silence by the ounce. Others argue that what's lost in sacredness is gained in accessibility, and maybe both are right. So, here we are, from Himalayan caves to Harvard labs, from monks in silence to brainwaves on PowerPoint slides, from the ineffable to the empirical. And through it all, meditation endures. Not because it's trendy, or even because it's effective, but because it speaks to something ancient and ordinary inside us all. A desire to be still, if only for a moment. And now, perhaps, you too are still. You sit at the mouth of a cave in the Himalayas a few thousand years back. Wind slips in and out like it's meditating too. The world is stone, cold, still. Behind you, deeper inside the cave, someone sits, not speaking, not moving. And they've been doing this for days, maybe weeks, possibly longer. They aren't trying to go viral. They're just trying to go inward. Meditation, or dhyana as they called it, wasn't a product. It was a practice. No chance yet, no schools, no brand. Just humans trying to make peace with their own thoughts. Historians still argue whether these early practices came out of Vedic fire rituals or if they emerged independently among hermit communities. Either way, around the 6th century BCE, meditation became a formalized escape from chaos, a kind of philosophical sigh. And then it wandered. One fringe theory suggests Indian monks crossed paths with early Taoist seekers, maybe in mountain passes, maybe over tea. Either way, by the time meditation reached China, it had to change its name to fit a new accent. Dhyana became Chan. Same breath, different syllable. But that's for later. Tonight you just sit. The cave is boring. Gloriously so. Your eyelids grow heavier. There are no revelations, just rocks. And still, the silence speaks. You don't know how long it's been. Time stretches oddly in caves, in silence, in breath. The early meditators didn't have Fitbits or daily streaks. What they had was rhythm. Inhale, exhale, repeat. If a thought came, they let it pass like a goat on a mountain path. A little disruptive, kind of stinky, but harmless. Then back to the breath. By the time these cave practices made their way down the slopes and into the valleys, something curious happened. Farmers took them up, then royalty, then poets. Stillness had gone viral, long before the internet made everything louder. In India, the Upanishads began whispering lines like, "As a man thinks, so he becomes." It wasn't motivational poster material. It was literal. Watch your mind like you'd watch a toddler near a candle. Gently, but always. Somewhere along the Ganges, someone began writing about the 8 limbs of yoga. Not poses, but a whole lifestyle. Sitting, breathing, withdrawing the senses. And somewhere between those Sanskrit syllables was a kind of timeless boredom, rich and slow like molasses. Then came Siddhartha. You probably know him as the Buddha. But before the Enlightenment, he was just a guy who walked out on his family to go sit under a tree. His story has been told in 100 styles, but tonight we'll remember the boring version, the long one, the dusty one, with way too much sitting and not enough climax. He tried pain. He tried starvation. Eventually, he just sat. And in that sitting, he became not happy exactly, but aware. That's when meditation got a serious upgrade. From quiet time to cosmic software. And it kept spreading. From India to Sri Lanka, to China, to Korea. Each time it moved, it morphed. Jhana to Chan to Zen. Different robes, same silence. You don't need to move much when you're already still. Right now you're lying in bed. But your breath. It's the same breath passed down through centuries. Through incense-filled temples and foggy mountaintops. Through dynasties and empires, through famines and iPhones. And here you are, just lying still, your eyelids heavier than before. Somewhere in 6th century China, a monk named Bodhidharma was said to have stared at a wall for 9 years. 9 years. Just staring. No notes. No snacks. Legend has it he cut off his own eyelids so he wouldn't fall asleep. Though honestly, that's probably historical fan fiction. Still, it says something about the vibe. Meditation wasn't for productivity. It wasn't for better digestion or sleep hygiene. It was just there, like a mountain or the moon. Something you sat with until you no longer needed to ask why. When Chan Buddhism took root in Chinese soil, It absorbed Taoist flavors, like mist absorbing into silk. The practices became less about doctrine and more about direct experience. Less sermons, more silence. Fast forward to Japan, and now you're entering a zendo. Wooden floors, rice paper doors, and a guy hitting a wooden block to remind you it's time to sit. And not in a comfy way. In a legs folded, back straight, don't scratch that itch kind of way. Zazen, they called it. Just sitting. You're not visualizing waterfalls or whispering affirmations. You're watching your breath like a cat watches a mouse. One blink too long and it's gone. One thought too loud and it slips away. And sure, it sounds poetic now, but imagine doing it before breakfast every morning for decades. Without a podcast, without a Spotify playlist. Just you and your slightly rebellious spine. By the 13th century, a Zen master named Dogen was writing long essays about how to wash your face mindfully and how to cook rice without losing your soul. He wasn't trying to be cute. He was trying to say, enlightenment isn't somewhere else. It's in the moment when you stir the soup and don't let your mind wander. And now here you are, listening, breathing, maybe thinking of soup. The point isn't to have no thoughts. The point is to know you're thinking. That tiny flicker of awareness, that's the ancient inheritance. From Himalayan caves to Kyoto kitchens, stillness was never a trend. It was a transmission. You're part of it now. By the time meditation drifted westward, it was already 1,000 years old and a little misunderstood. Europe, during the medieval centuries, had its own version of contemplation, cloaked in candlelight and Latin. Think monks in cold stone cloisters, copying manuscripts by hand and whispering the Psalms under their breath. They called it lectio divina, divine reading. You'd read a line, ponder it, read it again, then sit in silence, not unlike our Himalayan friend, except with more robes and less wind. And yet, no matter the language or religion, the core remained. Be here. Don't rush. Let the silence teach. By the 17th century, thinkers like Blaise Pascal noticed something curious. All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. And yes, that was centuries before smartphones. Meanwhile, back in Asia, meditation continued evolving, moving through Tibet, Korea, Vietnam, adapting like ivy, gripping each culture in its own quiet way. But the global detour we don't talk about enough. Colonialism. Empires arrived with ships and rifles and a complete disinterest in anyone sitting still. Meditative traditions were labeled superstitious, backward, or just ignored. Scrolls were taken. Teachers silenced. The stillness almost lost. Almost, because somehow the silence survived. Tucked inside monasteries and memory, it waited. Then came the 20th century, and with it, a bizarre twist. Westerners, tired of noise, began seeking silence again. Not in churches this time, but in ashrams, on mountaintops, in yoga studios. The silence had boomeranged back. By the 1960s, a few curious scientists and psychologists started peeking behind the curtain. Could meditation be measured? Was all that breathing doing something to the brain? So they brought monks into labs, hooked them up to EEG machines. Some subjects had been meditating for decades, and their brain waves looked weirdly peaceful. Peaceful enough to fund more studies, peaceful enough to get government grants, peaceful enough that Harvard got involved. And now you're lying in bed, somewhere in the modern world, listening to the echoes of it all. Breathing in a practice older than your name. Breathing out a history more patient than any clock. No need to chant. No need to sit cross-legged. Just notice the breath. It's all still here. Still working. Still boring. Wonderfully, blessedly boring. So now we arrive in the soft-lit corridors of modern psychology departments, where the hum of fluorescent lights replaces the howl of Himalayan wind. Here, meditation wears a white lab coat. It's been rebranded, packaged into acronyms like MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and tested on stressed-out undergrads for extra credit. And while the essence might still be intact, the vibe is, well, a bit different. You see, when John Kabat-Zinn founded his mindfulness clinic at the University of Massachusetts Medical School in the late 1970s, he wasn't trying to make a spiritual movement. He just wanted to help people in pain, chronic pain, emotional pain, without giving them sermons or side effects. He invited patients to lie down and simply notice their breath, their thoughts, their pain. Not fix it. Just witness it. It was radical at the time, and predictably, it was almost ignored. Almost, but then some of those patients started sleeping better. Some felt calmer. Some even felt nothing, which, as it turns out, was a relief. The researchers circled back. They stuck sensors on the skin, watched cortisol levels drop, and brain activity slow. A few of them probably nodded off during testing, and the journals published cautiously optimistic results. Meditation, once the tool of mystics and monks, had become a line graph. Meanwhile, in Harvard's neuroscience labs, meditation was being sliced into measurable moments, a breath here, a neural firing there. Experienced meditators showed less activity in the default mode network, a brain system that loves daydreaming and worrying about dinner. In layman's terms, meditators spent less time arguing with their own thoughts. What the monks had known for centuries, the scientists were now trying to name. And across the world, apps took notice. Mindfulness became marketable. There were corporate retreats where CEOs were told to breathe deeply before pivoting strategy. There were books with titles like 10% Happier and The Mindful Entrepreneur. There were candles, a lot of candles. It was the golden age of commodified calm. But somewhere beneath all the branding, the ancient silence persisted. You can still hear it now if you listen. Not to me, not to the app. Just the breath. Inhale. Exhale. As steady as it was in that cave, as unnoticed as it was in the cloisters, as quiet as it is tonight. And just like that, you're back inside the story. No lab, no monastery, just your own breathing and a very old tradition that somehow made its way into your bedtime. Still working, still boring, and still, somehow, divine. Now let's step sideways, not forward in time, but outward. As meditation settled into labs and living rooms in the West, it quietly returned to places that had never forgotten it. Vietnam, Korea, Tibet, Sri Lanka. Each carried their own thread of practice, sometimes stitched with silence, sometimes with chanting, sometimes with an old monk who just sat and smiled without blinking for minutes that felt like hours. In Vietnam, a monk named Thich Nhat Hanh began writing letters, not just to his students, but to the world. His words were soft, almost too soft for a world shouting over itself. But somehow they landed. Sentences like, "Feelings come and go like clouds in a windy sky. Conscious breathing is my anchor." You can almost feel that one settle into your chest, like a stone at the bottom of a lake. Meanwhile, Korean Seon masters emphasized sudden insight. One moment you're sweeping the courtyard. The next you understand the entire universe, but only if you're not looking for it. Back in Japan, a Zen abbess named Shundo Aoyama Roshi, wearing glasses too big for her face and a robe that never quite stayed still, reminded people to bow. Not just to teachers, but to teacups, to vegetables, to the silence between bells. In Tibet, meditation was layered with visualizations, deities, mandalas, light. Complex, rich, breathtaking. But still at its heart, it was about presence. The same breath, the same boring rhythm. And in Sri Lanka, where the Theravada tradition still echoes through jungle monasteries, monks used tiny bells to mark the passing hours, each ring a reminder that this moment, however mundane, is the only one you ever actually get. Across all these geographies, styles, and robes, there was a quiet agreement. Stillness matters. And here you are, lying in bed, not in a monastery, not in a cave, not in a Harvard lab, just here. And yet, not so different. Your breathing keeps time with the ancients. Your thoughts rise and fall like incense smoke. No grand epiphany needed. No enlightenment required. Just the comfort of knowing that for thousands of years, someone, somewhere, has also been sitting, eyes soft, breath slow, thinking absolutely nothing of consequence. And it helped. Maybe it helps you, too. Let's stay with that for a moment. It's the early 1600s now. Europe is busy colonizing and warring and inventing complicated hats. But somewhere beneath all the noise, a few curious minds begin peeking eastward. Not for spices this time, but for something stranger. Stillness. Jesuit missionaries return from Asia with more than conversion stories. They carry with them reports of monks who sit without moving for hours, sometimes days. Contemplative heathens, one priest mutters in a letter. Others are more intrigued. Back in salons and drawing rooms, noble women begin practicing what they call quietude. It's not quite meditation, more like a whispered imitation. They sit still in the mornings before their staff wakes up, hands folded, eyes half closed. Just breathing. This is how meditation trickles west. Not in grand philosophies, but in drips, letters, footnotes, curious moments. And then there's the philosophers. Descartes sits in his study and writes about thinking. A lot. Maybe too much. I think, therefore I am, he says. But his contemporaries argue that not thinking might be just as revealing. What if identity isn't in our ideas, but in our pauses? It's a wild, unpopular notion. And yet, even among powdered wigs and powdered pastries, some begin to sense that silence, true, prolonged, awkward silence, might be medicinal. Meanwhile, back in Japan, Zen gardens are raked into abstract waves. Stones are placed to suggest thought without expression. Monks spend afternoons watching shadows shift on paper screens. And what are you doing? You're lying still, breathing, quiet. No lesson, no goal. You've let the day's complexity dissolve into something ancient, something boring, something whole. It took meditation thousands of years to reach you, and now it asks nothing in return but your soft attention. Let's stay here a little longer. We drift now into the 1700s, a time of enlightenment, revolutions, wigs the size of small children, and candlelit debates over reason and the soul. Europe is cracking open its old certainties, and meditation, though not yet called that in polite conversation, has found strange footholds in the shadows of these grand ideas. In Prussia, a young Immanuel Kant wakes and walks the same path at the same hour, every day. Rain, shine, snow, it doesn't matter. His neighbors allegedly set their clocks by him. He never speaks of meditation, but his ritual, it's as close as one might get under the stiff collar of a German philosopher. He walks in silence. He thinks and unthinks. He observes the world as it slides past in slow, predictable rhythm. It's not a chant, but it's a cadence. Not a mantra, but still a method. Meanwhile, in distant Kyoto, Zen continues its gentle reign. Monks practice zazen, sitting meditation, Not for enlightenment, but because that's what one does. The point isn't transcendence, it's just showing up. Every day, on the cushion, with the breath, over and over until the question of why dissolves. In this same era, Buddhist texts begin to reach Europe, not in torrents, but in flickers. Translated by scholars, misinterpreted by many, and passed around among intellectuals who are just curious enough to ask, what if stillness is a kind of science? But science, at this time, wants explosions and formulas and machines. It has little patience for breath counting and watching clouds pass. And yet quietly, meditation begins infiltrating the West, not through lab coats but through poetry. William Wordsworth speaks of a heart that watches and receives. Ralph Waldo Emerson describes a soul in unison with nature. They're not sitting cross-legged in robes, but they're tapping into the same still well, the one behind all noise. And you've tapped in too. Lying there, breath gently rising and falling, perhaps you've begun to feel the edges blur, thoughts slow, muscles soften. You're not aiming for insight, just peace. And in this long, slow story, that's more than enough. Let's keep drifting. We enter the 1800s, and like everything else in that age, meditation gets caught in the steam. The Industrial Revolution is clanking along, pouring soot into the skies of London and spinning cotton in Manchester. Humanity is in a hurry, wearing pocket watches and ticking toward productivity. Stillness. Who has time? But in a curious twist, as the West accelerates, it also starts to look east, not out of spiritual longing, but colonial curiosity. British scholars in India begin to translate Sanskrit texts more thoroughly. Not because they're seeking enlightenment, mind you, but because empire likes to understand the things it controls. Ironically, in trying to categorize and systematize the East, they import something far slipperier, meditation. Meanwhile, Henry David Thoreau, sitting by Walden Pond with a pencil and far too many opinions, reads the Bhagavad Gita. He doesn't quite get it, but something sinks in. He writes of morning air and simplicity, of stripping life to its quiet bones. His version of meditation is American, transcendental, and a little self-righteous. But hey, it's a start. Across the sea, Leo Tolstoy begins journaling obsessively about his inner world. He writes long treatises on moral stillness, on resisting desire, on finding God in the silence between thoughts. He doesn't sit on a cushion, but he wrestles with the same beast, the restless mind. In Asia, meditation doesn't try to compete with all this noise. It just stays where it always has, on temple floors, in forest monasteries, in the breath of those who still care to listen. A few Western travelers come and sit. Some leave. Some stay. A trickle begins. Back in your room centuries later, it's quieter than the cotton mills and less smoky than the London alleys. But your thoughts still buzz like they've been wound tight. And yet, somewhere beneath them, there's a pulse, a soft rhythm, an echo of monks, philosophers, writers, and wanderers all watching the same silent thing, your breath. Let's go deeper still. The 20th century begins with war drums and ends with Wi-Fi, and somehow, in between, meditation slips into the West wearing borrowed robes. It starts subtly. In the 1920s and 30s, a few spiritual tourists, let's call them the sincerely confused, make their way to Asia. They're not soldiers or missionaries this time, but poets and seekers. They meet Zen masters, sit in silence, and try to describe it in English, usually badly. Then comes D.T. Suzuki. A Japanese scholar with a bow tie and patient eyes, Suzuki begins teaching Zen to Western students, not just the practice, but the tone of it. His books land on shelves in New York and London, right beside Freud and Hemingway. The intellectuals are intrigued. The beat poets are obsessed. By the 1950s, Allen Ginsberg is sitting zazen in his chaotic Brooklyn apartment. Jack Kerouac, too, though his meditation often looks suspiciously like a hangover, but the seed is planted. Meanwhile, in Burma and Thailand, a new wave of Westerners show up, not for philosophy, but technique. Vipassana meditation begins to get parsed like a recipe. Observe the breath. Scan the body. Let go of judgment. Repeat for 10 days in silence. Some of these students return home not just calmer, but converted. They become teachers. By the 1970s, meditation is no longer exotic. It's starting to look clinical. Enter John Kabat-Zinn. A microbiologist with a quiet voice and a curiosity for Eastern practices, he removes the Sanskrit and rebrands meditation as mindfulness-based stress reduction. It works. It gets funding. It gets published. Now you can meditate in a hospital, in a school, at your desk. No robes. No incense. Just you and a timer. And here we are. You're lying back, screen glowing dim, listening to a voice talk about 2,500 years of people sitting down and doing nothing. That's the strange beauty of it. Meditation asks nothing of you except to notice what's already there. The breath, the noise, the quiet under the noise. You're not chasing enlightenment. You're just watching your thoughts play themselves out like clouds over a lake. One breath, then another. And you, still here? Modern science, once skeptical of this doing nothing, now embraces it with open arms. And machines. Brain scanners hum, tracing neural pathways lighting up like city grids at night. Researchers study monks who've spent decades in retreat, their brains showing patterns once thought impossible. Heightened focus, deep calm, even physical changes in brain structure. Harvard, MIT, and other bastions of reason now publish study after study on meditation's effects, reducing anxiety, improving memory, rewiring how we handle stress. What was once dismissed as mystical mumbo-jumbo has become a prescription, a wellness hack, a lifestyle trend. And yet the essence remains quietly rebellious. Because while apps remind you to meditate at 7 o'clock a.m. and podcasts sell guided journeys, real meditation resists control. It is boring. It is uncomfortable. It's the stubborn act of facing your own mind, with all its messiness, without distraction. There's no applause for sitting still. No certificate for quiet. Just the slow, steady work of presence. Maybe that's why it endures. Across time and culture, through empires and internet eras, meditation whispers one simple truth. Stillness is strength. So here you are, in this moment, part of a lineage stretching from cold caves to warm labs, and all you need to do is breathe. Before we close tonight's chapter, let's pause with a small but curious detail, a practice some monks reportedly committed to for decades, counting their breaths. Imagine this, 40 years of silent, patient breath counting, not for achievement, but for presence. A life marked by the simple rhythm of inhale and exhale, as steady as the turning of seasons. No rush, no prizes, just the endless cycle of breath anchoring mind and body. It sounds almost absurd in our hyperactive world, doesn't it? But this quiet devotion held profound meaning. Counting breaths was a gateway, a gentle tether keeping wandering minds from floating too far into distraction or despair. It was the slow march of time itself, measured not by clocks or calendars, but by the steady pulse of life's essence. And through this, a transformation occurred, not loud, not flashy, but subtle and enduring. As you prepare to drift off, consider this. Maybe the secret isn't to seek excitement or answers, but to return again and again to that quiet rhythm within. Thank you for joining this long, slow journey across centuries and continents. If you found peace here, please like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together.